One of the principles of the disciples' generous response is to respond faithfully. And this principle reminds us that our response to God's gifts of love and grace should be to serve others and let generosity become part of our nature. But how does generosity become part of our nature? As one of our recent worship themes reminds us, we are called to practice generosity. Practice is doing something repeatedly and regularly to improve our ability. So responding faithfully means not only being generous right now, but also being generous repeatedly and regularly, time after time, growing a habit of generosity that becomes part of our nature. I witnessed an example of this while at a recent worship service. There's a young family that attends one of the congregations that I regularly go to. I've noticed that when it comes time for the disciples' generous response, the parents, Don and David, make sure that their daughter Rosalind has something to put in the basket when it comes by, whether a nickel, a quarter, or a dollar. Each Sunday becomes a lesson for young Rosalind that reinforces the importance of receiving and giving generously. Seeing this interaction reminded me of the many times when I was a young child and my mother would reach into her purse and pull out some money that she gave to me so that I could participate and practice generosity. Although I did not always recognize it at the time, this simple practice helped instill in me the lesson of generosity and gave me the opportunity to not just hear about responding faithfully, but to actually make my own faithful response. I don't doubt that part of the reason that I continue to respond faithfully with generosity were those small lessons practiced during my formative years. Part of responding faithfully is helping others learn those lessons of generosity. By modeling generosity, we pass on the lessons we learned from those faithful disciples before us to a whole new generation of disciples. I can already tell that Rosalind has begun to learn the lesson of generosity. Later in that service, she had come back to the pew I was sitting in and was playing with a number of small tiles. Each of the tiles had a color or a picture on it, and she was grabbing a handful and placing a few at a time back on the pile. At one point, she looked up at me, grinned, and handed me about half of what she had in her small hands. She wanted to share what she had so that I could be part of the fun that she was having. And each time she grabbed a handful to start over, she again gave some of hers to me. In this simple but generous act, I could tell Rosalind was practicing the generosity she was learning from her parents and others in the congregation. Not only was this a wonderful object lesson that helped reinforce the theme for me, it was also a reminder that our calling to respond faithfully and give generously according to our true capacity is not only related to our monetary contributions, but also to our relationships. Certainly, it is vitally important that we give faithfully to help support the mission of Jesus Christ in our communities and throughout the world. It is also important to recognize that being generous goes beyond what we give and contribute each Sunday. It is something that we can practice in our relationships and personal interactions on a daily basis. The principle of responding faithfully invites us to ask ourselves how we can exemplify the love and grace that God has given us by sharing our gifts, talents, and stories with those around us. It calls us to be intentional about taking a break from the busyness of life to focus on someone else and build authentic relationship and community with them. If we can allow ourselves to be open to the Spirit, to be open to the Spirit moving in our lives, we can recognize the worth of all people. We can see how what we have to offer can help fill a need in their lives. Sharing God's love for us, we become living testimonies to each person we meet, so that they too can experience God's love. In our daily interactions, our willingness to share our gifts and talents, our regular contributions in person and online, or simply sharing some of what we have with those around us, we have countless opportunities to practice generosity and respond faithfully.